we've recently come out with a defense policy update that I think applies a very significant and necessary focus on continental defense, which I would also share with the concerned senators. I would talk to them about the nearly $40 billion investment that we are making in NORAD modernization. We know we've got work to do. We've acknowledged that from day one, that there's more that we need to do. We've clearly indicated in our budget the path to getting that done. And I'm sure I'd be able to assure those concerned senators that Canada will be a ready and capable ally.
Defense Minister Bill Blair responding not too long ago to a bipartisan letter from 23 U.S. senators urging Canada to meet its 2% NATO spending commitments. The senators writing in part, "We are concerned and profoundly disappointed that Canada's most recent projection indicated that it will not reach its 2% commitment this decade." The letter goes on to say, when the United States hosts the 2024 NATO summit, we will expect your government and every NATO member that has not met the 2% defense spending threshold to have a plan to reach this benchmark as soon as possible. The letter is signed by Republicans, including Mitt Romney and Ted Cruz, and Democrats, including Chris Coons and Joe Manchin. It comes just 2 months before NATO member countries, as the letter references, are set to meet in Washington. With us now to unpack the potential impact of that letter, former Chief of Defense Staff, retired General Tom Lawson is here, alongside former Navy Commander, retired Vice-Admiral Mark Norman. Hello to both of you. Thank you very much for making the time. I appreciate it. General Lawson, Vice-Admiral Norman, this isn't a strange conversation. The three of us were last together, I think, talking about calls from NATO itself for us to spend more. But this is interesting. Some of the names on this letter are pretty high-profile senators. And I think the first question that jumped out to me, General Lawson, was why now?
Well, I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is quite simply that the next NATO summit is going to be in Washington. These senators, these lawmakers want to make sure it's going to be successful. And if they can bring pressure to bear on some of the laggards, including Canada, and find that there is a successful response, that will be good for the outcome of this summit. But I think more to the point, there is a growing recognition that there's a high risk the next president will be President Trump. And for any senators who see NATO as a very important alliance, these 23, quite clearly, they would like to clear away as many excuses as they can, I think, for President Trump to take some significant actions that they think would be detrimental to NATO, like pulling out entirely, or more likely declaring kind of a two-tier NATO, where those who don't pay up aren't really going to be protected if attacked.
Do you think, Vice-Admiral Norman, the prospect of Trump is certainly weighing on the senators who signed this letter? And what do you think of the list of them?
Well, I have no doubt, as General Lawson said, that they're hedging their bets, and I don't think there's politics in that. I think it's just a concern that some of the polite patience that we've discussed, the three of us before, especially in Washington, is likely to wear thin. The Washington summit, as General Lawson indicated, is significant for another reason as well. It's the 75th anniversary of the creation of the Washington Treaty, which is the charter document for the creation of NATO in the first place. So there is some significance there. And as it relates to the bipartisan nature of the signatories, I think that is significant in and of itself, because it does transcend the political traps, if you will, of candidate A versus candidate B, which is a bit of a distraction in these conversations.
And I would even add to that, General Lawson, there are a few names on this letter that right away jumped out to me because of the frequency with which they have had bilateral meetings with Canadian legislators or being on side with Canada on a number of issues. Senator Coons, for example, jumps out as a huge ally of Canada on a number of issues, particularly the detainment of Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor. I remember him speaking out quite forcefully on that. Joe Manchin, Senator Manchin, for example, also huge in promoting the energy industry in this country. So like Vice-Admiral Norman points out, like this isn't just a list of people who would be the usual suspects in some ways. This is a list of people who are pretty closely allied with our country.
Right. So it makes it even more significant. And now what we have to do is we have to speculate how the Prime Minister and the government will respond to this. And In other years and other times, I think a government that's looking towards an election within the next couple of years might savor a fight with the United States. It plays well sometimes in Canada. But I don't think that's what we're talking about now. I think what we're talking about now is a time in which Canadians recognize that there are great threats around the world, and they see America as a friend in that. And if the government determines that a significant part of the population is very pro-defense, they're going to see this letter coming from the senators as something that should be responded to positively by the government. And then what we're into is, how does the government respond in a way that satisfies these senators and yet matches the monies that Canada will have in coming years?
Yeah, just jumping off that, Vice-Admiral Norman, I think what else is interesting about the timing is that it comes after the release of the Defense Policy Review. That conversation we had last time, the three of us, was prior to the release of that. It was ahead of the anticipated release of it. And this is, I feel, a bit different. And you can almost hear it with Minister Blair. He was saying, hey, we are spending more. We do have this plan that we've put out. I would show them this plan. But they know that plan. They've actually even encapsulated it in their letter, pointing to the fact that by the end of the decade, we'll get to 1.7%. Essentially, what they're saying is that's not enough.
Right. And that shouldn't surprise us, that their narrative, they being not just Washington, but other key allies in NATO as an organization, have been telling us that, look, we want to see a concrete plan to 2%. And notwithstanding the merits of the defense policy update with respect to all the different things that are going to be explored and the increased spending that the minister legitimately is referring to, the bottom line is they're not answering the mail. And this is a significant gap in the expectations of the leadership in Washington and more broadly the leadership in NATO. And, to some degree, the government got a bit of a easy ride, if you will, when they rolled out the defense policy update, because there was enough ambiguous language that they could put a reasonably positive spin on it. The funding, if we take it at face value, most of it is in the out years, well beyond the mandate of this government and arguably into the mandate of a next or subsequent government. And as you alluded in your question, one of the big concerns I have, notwithstanding the political pressure associated with this, is the fiscal framework and the fact that, the debt payments here nationally are going up significantly, and that's putting enormous pressure on spending. And as Minister Blair has indicated publicly, he had a tough time convincing his cabinet colleagues that even 1.7% was a reasonable target. And now we're seeing that that's not enough. So this story isn't over, and I'm not sure there's an easy way out for this government.
General Lawson, it is fascinating that the minister was kind of speculating about that, or speaking about it, I should say, publicly at all. That isn't normally the case. Is there a way to address, I guess the elephant in the room appears to me to be that we're the only ally without a plan. That's the part that kind of confuses me. Would it be so difficult for the government to articulate a plan while also recognizing the fiscal pressures they face, which are very real? I don't want to deny that in any way. And maybe it's not for next year or the 3 years, but you articulate a plan to get to 2% at some point. I am a little perplexed why they feel like they can't do that.
Right. Well, I think that the defense policy that was just published was quite honest. I think it was put out there by a government that's going to try and find the money to do the things that are in the policy. What you're getting to is there not some sort of language that can be added that indicates, responds to the issue of getting to 2% as quickly as possible. But it's tough if you want to be clear and honest about it. I mean, one way to do it, and the Admiral could give a lot more detail than this to me, is outline a plan to buy 12 conventionally powered subs, accelerate the program and put several billion down on that right now. And I think quite quickly we would be showing how we'd be at full 2% before the end of this decade. The problem with that for the current government is they haven't prepared the nation. Although the Admiral Norman and I would be delighted to hear about such a plan, there's been no preparation. So you're kind of left with trying to find something that answers not only these 23 senators, but the NATO Secretary General, who was here just a while back asking for the same thing, and to balance off how Canadians would feel about it. I think there's a way. I think that if Canada seeks to refurbish their bases, wings, and ports across the country right now that really have fallen into deep and chronic disrepair, fill the parts bins for all of the fleets, Army, Navy, and Air Force, and then become the employer of choice by upping pay and benefits. And I think pay and benefits are fairly fair right now, but if you want to compete against other employers and fill up those 10 or 20,000 positions that are empty, if you do all of these things, almost all that money stays in Canada, and make it clear right now that these senators, nor the NATO Secretary General, have said where that spending should take place. Make it happen right here in Canada.
Vice-Admiral Norman, I've got 30 seconds left. Last word to you.
Well, look, there are lots of ways to achieve the target. The challenge for the government is articulating a plan to do so. And there is apparent reluctance within the caucus and cabinet, and that's understandable. But the reality is that we have an obligation to this. We are a G7 country. We are one of the founding members of NATO. We depend on multilateral security. We depend on our relationship with the United States, not just for our security, but for our economic well-being. We need to think strategically, and we need to think the long game here. And that this may require some risk to be taken, political risk on the part of the government. Otherwise, we're going to continue to be slapped around, to put it bluntly.
I'm going to leave it on that note. Thank you very much, both of you, for making the time for your analysis. Appreciate it.